to Insight class, where First Presbyterian's identity, faith, and values meets today's world. This is being conducted on Zoom, of course, and is being recorded to be put on the church's YouTube site, as all the Insight classes are, at least since we've started meeting via Zoom. Today is April the 18th, 2021, and we are in the midst of a series of classes related to social changes and how they affect institutions. We are joined today by Jennifer Bradley. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Dr. Bradley is the Kirkwoods Academic Affairs Vice President. She's been at Kirkwood for 15 years, and she did her PhD work in American literature at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I know it's not going to be the subject of your talk, but it'd always be interesting to hear a short version of kind of your academic area as well, if you don't mind, Jennifer. We're very pleased to welcome you, and our church service starts at 10, so if we can stop a little bit before then, it goes as long as it goes, but if we can, that can be the outer limit of how long the class goes, maybe 5-10 minutes before 10, that would be great. So with that, I think you have the ability to control the screen. We'll welcome you and look forward to your presentation and the discussion.
Very good. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the invitation, and excited to share a little bit with you today about what's happening at Kirkwood and sort of what we see in terms of what might be coming for higher education in general. Let's see, I'm trying to think what I can tell you a little bit about my own background that might be interesting. So I'll give you just a tiny little snippet because I want to get to the good stuff. But while I was at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln for my master's degree, I discovered this wonderful author named Willa Cather, who I had never heard of before and never read, and was mesmerized by her work in all sorts of ways. And so it just so happens, of course, that Willa Cather attended the University of Nebraska-Lincoln as a student, and some of the world's leading experts on her work were faculty at the university. And so they welcomed me into that community, and I was hooked. And so I went back there for my PhD as well to continue my work, focusing specifically on Willa Cather. And if you have not read her, I would highly recommend that you try picking up My Antonia, or let's see, A Lost Lady, depending on what your style is. I'm happy to chat about that afterwards if someone has something that they want to talk about Cather, because I could talk about that all day long. But you invited me to talk about the future of higher education and the future of Kirkwood, and so that's what I'm excited to do today. So I'm going to see if I can manage this. Yep. So let's dive in, because I want to give just a little bit of context about Kirkwood. And I'm sure you know, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. But Kirkwood's been around for quite a long time, right? Established in 1966. Our first official name was Area X Community College. Didn't quite have the ring that we were looking for. In 1969, actually, there was a vote on campus about the name, and we ended up renaming ourselves Kirkwood Community College after honoring the Iowa governor during the Civil War years. We serve a 7-county region and are governed by a board of trustees who are elected to their roles and are volunteers and do amazing work for our college. In 1982, we became a member of the League of Innovation, which is a national organization committed to innovation in community colleges. Our main campus is located obviously here in Cedar Rapids, but we have a campus of some sort in every county that we serve. Typically, on an average year, we're serving about 20,000 students. We're the second largest community college in Iowa. That fluctuates. We have a good, healthy competition with DMAC and Des Moines to see who's the largest each year. We're the fourth largest of any higher ed institution. So I think that sometimes surprises folks to know that we're a larger institution than you and I. We offer 3 degrees here, the Associate of Arts, the Associate of Science, and the Associate of Applied Science degrees. All 3 of those degrees transfer both to all of the Regents institutions and to other privates, both in the state and out of the state. Our mission at Kirkwood is to identify community needs and provide accessible, quality education and training, and to promote lifelong learning. And so, with those 20,000 students, we're typically awarding about 269, 270 credits. We also, I think, are really proud of the fact that we have about 6,300 students taking dual enrollment. Those are students who are still in high school, who while in high school are also concurrently taking college level courses. And so the courses that they take with us count both towards their high school graduation requirements and towards a potential college degree. And they get to take those classes for free. And as a result of that, we are saving those families about $6.9 million a year in tuition that they do not have to pay, which we see as a great service and an opportunity for students to try college and see if it's for them in a really supportive atmosphere that they're used to in their high schools. Kirkwood is now, I'm on the credit academic side of the house, but we also do a lot of really good workforce development programming. You can see 52,000 plus students who are seeking opportunities for enrichment, professional growth, etc. We awarded over 10,000 recognized credentials and awards. Sorry, I'm a little distracted. I keep admitting, folks. We also offer lots of opportunity for people who maybe do not have some financial challenges in order to pursue higher education. So our GAP and our K-PACE programs particularly target areas in industry where there's current demand for employees and help folks train in those areas in order to immediately walk from Kirkwood once they complete their training right into a job. HISET is our high school completion program, and we also serve about 650 plus ESL students in our free ESL program. That's in addition to the crediting program that we have on campus. So I want to talk just a little bit about Kirkwoods' response to the pandemic, just to give you some notion about what we've been doing, because I think it leads into this conversation about where we're going in higher ed as a whole. So if you think back to last spring, just about this time, we've just passed our 1-year mark. We went right into incident command mode here at Kirkwood, which was our methodology for managing what was happening. We had to move quickly, obviously, to get a website up, to figure out how we were going to start meeting as college leadership, how we're going to get word out through things like social media and other media outlets. We decided to close all of our locations on March 19th and sort of take a pause and try and figure out what we were going to do. And we fortunately were heading that week into spring break. So students were scheduled to be gone for a week, which bought us just a little bit of time to try and figure out our next steps. We moved all of our instruction online beginning March 23rd, right following spring break. We had sort of an interesting combination of things. So our lecture classes, what you might consider sort of traditional lecture classes, moved to an online format um, pretty quickly. The question was what we were going to do with lab format classes, right? And hands-on classes. And we had to ask them to be really creative because we knew that these students needed still to get the skills and have the experiences that would prepare them either for transfer or for employment, and had to figure out how we were going to do that. So I want to share just a couple of examples of sort of some of the creative things that our faculty did because they really stepped up quickly to sort of get things figured out. We had everything from, for example, our diesel technology program. That instructor took machinery parts home with him, to his home shop in his garage and recorded videos using his phone of the skills that students needed, uploaded those onto YouTube so that students could see what they needed to see in order to, sort of keep moving forward. Um, in hospitality, for example, those folks quickly had to figure out how they were going to get the culinary skills out to students when they weren't in their kitchens anymore, figuring out how to do things. And so not only did they do a similar approach in terms of recording videos of themselves practicing the skills that they needed, they also kitted up all of the things that the students would need in their home kitchens, both ingredients and utensils that they would need. And students drove by, picked up their kit, which was left out on the curb with their name on it, to take that home. And then the students had to record themselves, right, practicing those skills after they had watched the video and send those videos back into those faculty to watch. We had there's a ton of stories like that, right? Electronics engineering technology program, that's a program where folks are learning how to make digital circuits, and they sent, again, kitted up all the parts and said, okay, you have to assemble and then put it back in the bag and drop it off, and we'll double check that it's assembled the way that it needs to make the circuit work. Even things like ceramics classes where they kitted up all of the clay and the tools that folks needed to send it home. And even for some of our advanced students, we have electric potter's wheels in our ceramic studio, and we just sent home the potter's wheels with the students so that they could do that work at home and then bring the work back, leave it outside. Someone would come and get it, and then that work would be fired so that it was ready for the next phase once we were able to figure things out. So there was a lot of that kind of, how were we going to get things figured out? The only place I think really where things just sort of came to a halt were in our health areas, because we had students who had been in clinical sites, and those clinical sites shut down and were no longer accepting students. So that impacted our nursing program and some of our allied health programs, including dentistry sorts of things, because they weren't allowing students in. And so those faculty had to figure out what they were going to do. And those programs go year round, including in the summer. And so their strategy was to move some of the content that would have been covered in the summertime up, the more lecture-based, information-based portion of those classes, to hold off on the clinical parts. And we were very fortunate that for the most part, all of those clinical opportunities ended up reopening in the summer, mostly through a lot of hard work and partnerships between area health agencies and hospitals and the faculty here at the college. They knew, for example, in nursing, they needed those nurses in our healthcare system. They wanted them to graduate on time and get out and help with the pandemic. And so we were able to make arrangements with places like Mercy to say, you want these graduates, how about if you make an arrangement where you're going to hire those graduates immediately upon graduation, thus they're an employee, and you'll let them in to finish their clinical and then stay on as an employee. So we figured out some really creative ways to try and make it work, but we were able to get those students through their programs. We had to cancel some things, right? We didn't have commencement as we had planned. In the summertime, we stayed with classes for the most part online. Some of those courses that were more hands-on, we toward the end of summer in August, right before the fall started, we were able to bring some of those classes back online for face-to-face stuff so that they could finish again those lab and hands-on things. We kept our facility closed through the summer, but despite that, the college itself was open and all of our services were shifted to virtual. And I think that it's important to know that we had to do a lot of support of those students because we wanted them, right, to be successful. And so we had to do quite a bit of outreach, both in the spring and in the summertime. In terms of technology, students didn't have laptops, didn't have hotspots. How were we going to manage that? We saw an increased demand on our food bank. We have a food pantry here on campus that is quite active, and we needed to figure out how to manage that. And so we had a drive-up food pantry throughout the spring and summer once the campus closed in our rec center area, where our staff would go prepare sort of different grocery bags full of stuff. The students would drive up in their cars and pop the trunk, and we would fill it full of food and send them on their way because that need didn't go away, and in some ways it intensified as a result of folks losing their jobs. We saw increased demand for mental health counseling, and we needed to figure out how we were going to manage that. We were not eligible to offer sort of telemedicine type of mental health that requires a special licensing. And so we ended up contracting out with an outside provider in order to be able to continue to provide that opportunity to our students who needed it so desperately. And eventually we were able to actually get that licensure so that we were able to offer that starting in the fall, the mental health counseling that we had in the past. And a lot of sort of student emergency grants. We always have a fund at Kirkwood.
Why can't I?
Unusual circumstances and
Can you-
some short-term help. And so we were keeping that going. So in terms of sort of where we ended up for fall and spring this academic year, well, I guess I should at least mention that really big thing, of course, that happened in the summer, which was the derecho, which compounded everything, right? Right before the start of the fall semester, the derecho hit, impacted a large number of our employees and our students. And suddenly we were again finding that we needed computers again, more hotspots, but more importantly, housing and an increased demand on that food bank again. So trying to manage all of those needs of our students and our employees, we delayed the start of the fall semester by 1 week to give ourselves a little bit of time to sort of get everyone a chance to catch their breath. And then we hit the ground running. So for this academic year, we've offered our courses sort of in multiple instructional delivery formats. So some of our classes are offered online. Some of our classes are offered, well, I guess I should say synchronously and asynchronously. So online, we have fully online asynchronous classes. You can go in anytime and do your work, but we also offer classes through Zoom in the same way that we're holding this meeting. So the class is a typical class scheduled at a regular meeting day and time, and students check in via Zoom, and this is how the class is conducted. But we also have face-to-face classes for the students who wanted to be on campus and felt that that was the best learning method for them. And also for some of our programs where virtual just wasn't an option. A lot of our CTE programs, our career and technical education programs, decided to do as much as they could virtually in terms of the delivery of instruction, but for all of the lab and hands-on portions, we had students on campus doing that, doing those activities so that they could get the learning that they needed in their particular field. I would say we also moved to multiple support delivery formats. So advising, counseling, talking with a financial aid office, all of those things that are a normal part of a college, we're doing both face-to-face and virtually so that folks have that choice of what will work for them, depending on their comfort level, depending on their health requirements, and for some, according to their schedules, right? And what sort of makes the most sense for them. We also were very fortunate to be able to offer CARES funding to a lot of our students. So as you know, the federal government has awarded a number of 3 now funds to colleges and universities in order to support students. And every time that money comes, a certain percentage of it is sent, is dedicated to supporting students who are in need. And at community colleges, right, we already know that we have a larger percentage of students who are in need of financial support than others. And so the demand was quite high. For our first round, I wanted to make sure I got the numbers right. For our first round of CARES Act funding, which was awarded in the spring, summer, and fall of 2020, we awarded just over $3.1 million to 1,576 students. We had an application process. I will tell you that we received more applications than we were able to fund, and that we received those applications quite quickly. People were in strong need, and reading those applications in order to award those was sobering, the situations that some of those students found themselves in. The second round of funding, which was awarded in spring, this current semester, we just awarded just under $2 million, $1.999 million to 1,234 students. So that need is still there, and now we are awaiting the round 3 support, which again will be awarding to students. At this point, we don't know how many more students that'll be. I would say, just to give you a sense of the need, in addition to those those funds, we as an institution also helped an additional 241 pandemic affected students with our Kickstart grants this fall at about just under $500,000. And that money, came directly from our foundation trying to support students. And that's in addition to the computers and the hotspots and all of the other things that we're trying to provide students. So there's a great need out there, and we're doing our best to try and meet it. So all that leads us to this question about what's next for higher education. And I want to talk about some key themes I think that I see coming. The first is about affordability, right? There's lots of talk about how come college costs so dang much. What is that about? And the truth is that since 1980, college tuition and fees in the United States have increased by about 1,200% compared to the Consumer Price Index, which has only risen 236%. So for sure, college is getting more expensive, and there's lots of reasons for that. Part of it has to do with the fact that institutional expenditures have also increased. Things like people expect more in terms of student services. Counseling wasn't so much a thing. And now there's a lot of issues around mental health. And so we'll talk about that in just a minute. And those sort of additional services are expensive to provide. Obviously, there's all sorts of other things that go into that increased cost. The other thing I think that's on that I would mention just in terms of affordability in the state of Iowa, we're going to face some impending enrollment challenges. So starting in 2024, they're predicting what people in higher ed are calling the enrollment cliff, with a projected average decline in enrollment of about 7%, and that's considered a conservative estimate. Because there are fewer students who are in the pipeline in terms of our K-12 system who will be graduating and coming into higher ed. And so that means all of us in higher ed are trying to figure out how we're going to navigate that decrease in student population. In terms of affordability, it's absolutely also connected to the value of higher education. There are more questions now than there have ever been about, is it really worth it? What's the return on investment for higher education? And according to a 2019 Gallup poll, only about half of Americans believe that a college education is very important, which is a significant decrease from the 70% in 2013. That's a big drop. And the percentage of adults who believe that higher education is not too important doubled to 13%. So folks are starting to question, do we really need higher education? I think I can be fine without higher education. The problem is that we have simultaneously have some other data that tells us that we absolutely do, right? So we've seen an increase in the number of displaced workers as a result of the pandemic, and Iowa has fared well compared to maybe some other states. But before the pandemic, I will tell you that they had already predicted that we would have, let's see, state data, 15,000 unfilled jobs available in Iowa, which require technical skills gained through some sort of training or degree beyond high school. So we have the need. Economists had already predicted that about 2/3 of adults will need some sort of degree or credential by 2025 in order to meet the demand. And given the pandemic, that number will likely increase as industry turns more to technology and automation. And so how are we going to get folks into those jobs if they don't have the skills that they need? So we have this sort of disconnect between perceptions of the value of higher education and industry telling us that they need folks in higher education. And so how do we sort of balance that? And I think at the community college in particular, we've got an important role to play in that dialogue, and in helping with the community's economic recovery. So we're going to have to work with those partners in order to identify what it is that they really need, and also to help make the value proposition to potential students why it is valuable for them to come and to seek higher education. Another key theme that's really taken center stage in dialogue amongst those in higher education is the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right? Not surprising, given all that's going on in our society today with the Black Lives Matter movement. I think it's particularly important in the state of Iowa to know that there's a growing percentage of Iowa K-12 students who are minorities. And the truth of the matter is that currently they attend higher education at lower levels than do their white counterparts. So we have on average 70% of high school students in Iowa go on to attend college, but only 55% of Black and Latinx students go on to attend college. So we've got a gap there. And if those students are an increasing percentage of our population in our K-12 systems, that gap's going to increase. And so we need to figure out how we're going to collaborate with our K-12 partners to help those students see themselves as college bound and find their ways in our doors. And we're doing a lot of that work. Um,
Jennifer, is the effect of COVID and the derecho, is that factor into this challenge about diversity, equity, and inclusion?
it exacerbates the problem, right? We know that um, folks of color have experienced um, more challenges as a result of the pandemic than any other population in our community. And so um, I think the that then plays out as if they're already at an increased likelihood of not attending higher ed, and now they've had this impact of COVID and the pandemic, where we see more students having to work to help support families, um, that it makes higher ed feel further out of reach for them. So for sure. And of course, we have seen more uh, people of color also tend to be more frontline workers in our service industries, who again have been more impacted by COVID. And so um, uh, either because they have to work or because jobs have gone away in the food and hospitality industries. And so again, trying to figure out how to manage all that. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, has been a focus in higher ed for a long time. I would say probably the last 10 years, we've seen growing momentum. We recognize that even when students do get to higher education, nationally, there's a gap between their performance in terms of the percentage of those students who go on to graduate. And that's been a focus of intense work for quite a little while. But I think that's just increasing exponentially in terms of the determination to get it figured out and do something about it. I think in particular community colleges, because we see a larger percentage of low income, first generation, and students of color, we're the place where we're going to see this the most. And we're the ones that are going to have to do the heaviest lifting. And I think we're ready for it. But there's heavy lifting to do for sure. In terms of technology, right? We did the quick shift. Everything suddenly went virtual. And we heard back from folks that some people really like virtual. Some people really don't. And we have everything in between. But what we know is that students have and faculty have experienced learning in a new way for a lot of them. Many of them had never tried online learning, despite the fact that we've had online learning at Kirkwood for 20 years, because they just had never tried it, and now they have. And what we are hearing from students and what we're seeing in national trends is a lot of students suddenly went, I'm very interested in how I can combine classes so that maybe some of my classes are delivered in a traditional format and some of my classes maybe come in this new virtual format. Or even more of our students are really interested in a hybrid model, where maybe they don't come to class as often for the face-to-face instruction, and more of it is virtual. If you're going to have me come face-to-face, it's got to be worth my time. I want it to be some kind of learning that can't be delivered virtually. And so it's really causing folks in higher education to think about, how do we want to use that in class time? What's the best way to use it? How can we get more experiential learning, which we know enriches the students' learning and retention of the information that we're trying to share. Students, it seems, still want the experience, many of them, of campus life. They like that part. That's the part they're missing. But in terms of the instruction part of their college experience, they really are going to be expecting something a little bit different. They like the flexibility of some of that virtual delivery. And I would say that's just not traditional age students, that's adult students as well, right? Who suddenly have figured out that maybe I can manage going back to college because I can do this on a schedule that fits with my work schedule, that fits with my family expectations, etc. And that flexibility of that online delivery makes that a possibility. Beyond that, in terms of technology, I would say there's also lots of work being done around virtual reality, simulation options, ways to help use technology to get students experiences maybe that they wouldn't otherwise be able to get. And there's also lots of work being done around what's called day one digital, or OER. So day one digital means that textbooks and course materials are available electronically to students on the first day of class. What we find is that oftentimes students, well, some students just decide that they can afford tuition, but they can't afford to buy the books. And so they do without, or they have a delay in being able to purchase books or other materials. And so they start the first couple weeks of class without those things. And so making sure that we are day one digital, that students have everything that they need right from the start, makes a big difference in terms of access. We're also doing a lot of work around OER, open education resources, which is free resources to students. Those resources we can make available not only day one, but also at no cost to the students. That's working outside the traditional publishers industry, and there's a lot more open access stuff available. And so faculty are really working hard to figure out how can they get that done. Mental health is a big theme that we're hearing in higher ed right now. Before the pandemic, we were hearing that there was we were experiencing an increased need for mental health support on campuses, increased demand on our counseling offices, and colleges, I would say, in Iowa sort of have tended to go one of two ways, right? The choices were either to invest in more counselors and have more full-time counselors on your staff, or to contract it out with a mental health provider. And both of those both strategies work. But for sure, there's this increased demand for mental health support. And as you know, reading the news, the demand for mental health support has only increased in the pandemic. And so we'll be very interested to see how long we see that increased need persist out from whenever we get on the other side of this. Next is addressing pandemic learning loss. So just thinking about what are going to be the gaps for students who are coming to us from the K-12 system who have experienced learning disruption during the past academic year, right? K-12 is doing a great job of making sure that those students are learning, but we also know that it's not the same as being face-to-face, and there's been some bumps. And so how are we going to be prepared in order to meet that learning loss and make sure that students have what they need without putting students into a lot of developmental courses? Because we know that students who come to us who start in developmental courses often don't ever get out. That's a national trend. That's not just here at Kirkwood, but the more levels of developmental education that a student has to complete before they get to the good stuff, right? The stuff that they've come to college to learn, the more likely they are not to persist. And so we work really hard at Kirkwood to try and flatten that as much as possible. And so we're partnering again with the K-12 systems to think about how we're going to manage that learning loss. And then finally, this idea about a lost generation of learners. And I think this goes back to that DEI question that you asked earlier, Matt. for those populations that have been most impacted by the pandemic, higher education seems like low on the list of priorities of things that they're trying to manage right now. And so a lot of those students won't make it in our doors this coming fall, for example, or didn't make it in our doors this fall. And what we know is that those students, once they don't, particularly traditional age students, once they don't come to us direct from high school, they're harder to get back. And so nationally, what they're talking about is this sort of lost generation of learners, folks who never make it to higher ed, who had the potential, and what that means both for them individually in terms of meeting their own potential, but also what it means for us as a country to have a whole group of students not make it into higher education and thus not contribute to our society in the way that we might have otherwise expected. So we got all of those sort of themes going on. At Kirkwood, I guess maybe some of this I already talked about. You can see this change in the percentage of students who are in that minority category, right, has increased from 2000. We had about 9% of our population to now we've got about 25%. And as I mentioned earlier, that number is also increasing in the K-12. So we anticipate that that's going to continue to go. We continue to work with our area high school partners to address some of these things. These are just a couple of examples. We've got AmeriCorps volunteers who are working with our CTE programs. We've got a trio collaboration with Metro High School and with Linn-Mar High School. The state of Iowa is now just awarded some positions called College Career Transition Coordinators. We were awarded one of those positions with the Cedar Rapids Public School District, where we'll have a Kirkwood employee who is an advisor, officially called a College Career Transition Coordinator, who will actually be housed in the high school, who's meant to help students find their way from Cedar Rapids Public Schools into higher education, not necessarily Kirkwood, but higher education in general, focusing particularly on issues of equity in trying to help some of those students see themselves and have the confidence to go on for higher education. We also recently submitted a TRIO talent search grant. And if we're awarded that, that will work with 6 area high schools, again, in that same capacity of trying to help with helping students find their way into higher ed. An interesting collaboration is with the Zach Johnson Foundation and the Kids on Course program, if you're familiar with that. It's been in operation quite a while now, but essentially these are kids who start out in elementary school with the Zach Johnson Foundation, which provides great enrichment activities and support to the kiddos, while Kirkwood reaches out to provide support to the families. As we find that not only do those kids need support, but the parents need some support too. So we've helped those families. Some of the parents have found their way into our PACE program, which helps with getting adults into higher paying fields through free training options in in-demand fields, helping them with other career services programming, helping them with the college selection process once their kids get a little bit older. The Kirkwood Foundation has been managing scholarship investments for those families so that they have some funding available when the kids get old enough to go to college. So it's been a really great partnership with the Zach Johnson Foundation and supporting a nice number of families. We've been doing a lot of work around closing the outcomes gap. I mentioned already that students of color tend to pursue higher education less often, and we've got this ongoing gap once they get here. And so how are we managing that? We've hired additional folks whose focus is on diversity, equity, and inclusion, including a counselor specifically dedicated to that, as well as academic support positions that are specifically dedicated to that work, which we think really makes a difference. And then finally, I want to talk just briefly about guided pathways, and I recognize that our time is short. So what I'll say about guided pathways is that it's a national model that we are adopting here at Kirkwood to help provide students with a really structured, coherent educational experience around the time, from the time that they express interest in higher education, which might be in the middle school or high school age, up through transfer or job placement, wherever that might be. And it's based on this idea of 4 pillars. And you can see here all of the different research that's gone into the guided pathways movement. But the pillars are essentially clarifying the paths to students' end goals, which means making sure that students can see how to get from point A to point B and sort of all of the steps in between, and making it just really clear to them what needs to happen, particularly for first generation students, right? Higher education is confusing and we use a lot of jargon that they don't understand. And so the more we can clarify what's going on, the better. Helping students get on the path is the second pillar. That's about really front loading career exploration, interest inventories, skills inventories to help students find the best fit for them, and really know what their educational goals are. And then helping students stay on their path has to do with providing, so when we get them on the path, they've got a 2-year plan of exactly how they need to get from point A to point B. Now that 2-year plan might end up being a much longer plan than that, depending on whether they're a full-time student or a part-time student. But essentially it helps them see where they need to go. And this is about more intrusive stuff, so that if they get off that path, we can hurry up and pull them back in, have an early intervention, see what they need. And then the final one is ensuring that students are learning, making sure that we're doing our due diligence about assessment, improving what we're offering, and the like. So super fast. What questions do you have? I recognize I went really right up to the time. I'm sorry, Matt. Lots of exciting stuff and interesting stuff and important stuff to be thinking about in higher ed right now.
Absolutely. We do have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions, though, if people want to pick at a particular detail, maybe especially with lots of information.
I'd like to bring up one point, Matt. It's something that's niggled at me for a long time, Jennifer. When I was teaching at Co, I would bring it up once in a while with students. And that is, we in higher education tend to think of ourselves as absolutely essential, and everybody should do higher education. Everybody should go to college. And that just isn't true. The world is always going to need, at least for the foreseeable future, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, auto mechanics. Does this get any mention at all at schools like Kirkwood, which are kind of a crossover between the traditional higher education model and the, I'll call it vocational higher education model?
Right. So at Kirkwood, we have both what we call the career and technical education side and the liberal arts side, right? And what I would tell you is that you're absolutely right. We need plumbers and electricians and auto mechanics and industrial maintenance, and we offer all of those programs at Kirkwood.
But
and you can't go into those fields easily without some kind of credential. Now, we work pretty hard to partner with folks who are doing apprenticeship programs as well, in order to offer a variety of opportunities for work in those fields. But I think part of Tom, part of what I really like about the guided pathways model is that in that clarifying the path where we help students sort of pick, or getting students on the path, helping them pick which one is best for them, we have organized in a way that students see everything from what are the transfer areas where you could study through what are the certificate areas where you can study, all grouped around sort of common themes. Because you're right, not every student needs a 4-year degree for sure. But the more students we can get some kind of advanced certificate or credential or 2-year degree, I think the better off we're going to be.
But when a student comes into you, a student who enters on the academic path and they say, okay, I'm going to get my AA degree, I'm going to transfer to Iowa.
Yep.
And they come in after a year and they say, you know, this just isn't working out. I'm not sure this is for me.
Yep.
Do your counselors say, well, you know, let's look at something else. Let's look at being an electrician
Yes.
rather than majoring in English.
Right, yeah. Or engineering,
do,
right? Which is
your
where
counselors make this suggestion to students?
Absolutely. And we don't wait until they figure out that they can't be successful in the program where they've chosen, or that they've decided that the program isn't for them, right? We think that that exploration needs to happen at the beginning when they're first coming, so that they can see all of the options right from the start, and recognize that they all have equal value. And the truth is, at least at the starting wage, can make you as good a living, if not better, than if you pursue that 4-year degree. In the end, it works
Absolutely.
out the same, but at least to start, you know, some of those folks are making a lot more money than we are.
Even at the end.
Do you have any middle school programs that get kids excited about the prospect of planning down the road?
You bet. We have a program called Target Your Future, where we partner with middle schools to bring kids to campus and explore a variety of options within the programs that we offer, just to plant that early seed about, what are you thinking? Here are some different things maybe that you haven't considered. We also have a what is called work-based learning program, which partners with both middle schools and high schools for things like job shadows, and has a lot of, actually now after pandemic, a lot of material available online as well, where students can go in and explore a variety of fields to learn more. Because by high school, it's getting late, right? We need to get
Right.
students thinking earlier about all of the possibilities.
Thanks very much, Jennifer, for your
Of course.
presentation. I'd like to say that next week we're going to continue our exploration of social changes. In next week, it'll be how they relate to interpersonal relations. And Don Damsteeg, Family Psychology Associates, will be joining us. So hopefully we'll see you all next week. But again, Jennifer, thank you very much for your presentation. And if you don't mind hanging on for a minute after the class ends to talk about what would be the best Willa Cather book to read, I think that would be lovely. If you
My
have
pleasure. And if anyone has questions they didn't get a chance to ask, you can shoot them Matt's way. He'll send them to me in email and I'm happy to answer them.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And don't be late to church, because it's just about to start.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But I would like to ask Jennifer, what would be the one novel that you would recommend of hers?
If you're going to get into Cather, I would always say start with My Antonia. That's one of my favorites.
Okay. Very good. Good. Well, that seems like good advice. Well, thanks very much for your presentation. And
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. And there's lots to talk about. So I appreciate the opportunity.
great. Thanks. Thank
Enjoy
you.
the rest of your day.
You too. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.